A lot of people think the giants, also referred to as the Nephilim from the Bible, like Goliath, are just fairy tales and that they never really existed. I get it. It's hard to believe something we don't readily see in our modern world, and I too am skeptical when I hear about things that sound crazy. But did you know that there is real evidence that strongly suggests giant-sized humans actually existed and walked this earth in history? It's true. And in this video, we are going to list 7 of the most compelling types of evidence that point to this being true. But before we jump in, just a quick disclaimer. I'm just going to list and give the highlights for each of these types of evidence. If you want to learn more, I've added links to the best sources I've found on this subject down in the notes section below. So let's get started. All of the 7 points of evidence are interesting and relevant, but I'm going to start with the one that I personally find the most interesting, and that is weapons and related war items. Did you know that weapons and armor that are so large, only humans of extraordinary height and stature, aka giants, could wield in battle have been discovered? In 1962, an amazing archaeological find occurred in Israel called the Menash Hoard. The hoard was discovered by accident as farmers were plowing the fields in the area of Kfar Menash in Israel. A variety of weapon and tool-related items were uncovered in that find, including several spears and metal scales that were used for body armor. The items from the Menash Hoard are displayed at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. My brother in Christ, Joel Kramer, who is an expert in archaeology and founded the Expedition Bible channel on YouTube, has made an amazing video that deep dives into these giant-sized weapon and armor items, and why they have to have had been for giants like Goliath that we read about in the Bible. A link to his video, as well as some other sources on this topic, are provided in the notes section below. Conquistadors that traveled the world in search of riches and fame for various monarchies in Europe saw many things as they traveled to and explored the New World. Among all of the new things these explorers saw as they circumnavigated the globe was reports of giants in the area we know today as Patagonia, in Argentina. And this was not a one-off account. There were many accounts by different European explorers spanning several centuries, most of which occurred in the 15, 16, and 1700s. These eyewitness accounts became so ingrained in the European culture that these giants of the Patagons, as they were often referred to, were actually drawn and written into the maps that navigators used. Several of these maps survive to this day, showing pictures and/or notes pointing to Patagonia, and that giants lived there. Some will say that these stories of giants by European explorers and settlers were grossly exaggerated, and that the indigenous people of Patagonia must have just been taller than Europeans, but very much in the 6-foot range. I disagree though. If you look at the hand-drawn pictures and study the eyewitness accounts that were written in journals and other writings describing the size of these indigenous people, it is clear that these people of the Patagons were much taller than 6 feet, and more like in the 9 to 14-foot range. Also, given the superiority the Europeans felt about their civilization in those days, it doesn't really make sense that they would want to portray the indigenous people of the Patagons as far taller than their normal human height. So they were probably telling the truth about what they actually saw. The consistency of the accounts spanning several centuries is also telling, demonstrating consistency by a range of different people, which is an indicator of truth. The heights of the giants of the Patagons that were described is also consistent with what the Bible says about how tall the giants were. You can check out my video about the height range of the Nephilim here. There have been numerous newspaper articles and other non-fiction writings, as well as some black and white photographs that were taken over the past 200 years from all around the world that talk about discoveries of giant human bones, and in some cases, mummified remains of giant humans. Some of the most famous findings occurred at Lovelock Cave in Nevada, Catalina Island off the coast of California, the islands of Sardinia and Malta off the coast of Italy, and the Patagons in Patagonia. The frequency and nature of these stories suggests something is up. However, if that's the case, then where are the bones? This is a common question naysayers raise to disprove the existence of giants. There are a few theories that explain why these bones aren't displayed in museums or seen elsewhere. First, museums do not display everything they have. For all of the items out on the floor, there are far more items kept in storage. For whatever reason, and yes, there are some conspiracy theories floating around regarding this, the other museums, or institutions, or governments may not want to draw attention to giant-sized humans, and would prefer these items not be displayed for the public to see. Second, some people that discovered the bones usually found them in graveyards, so for superstitious or for reasons of honoring the dead, the bones were sometimes reburied or burned. Third, some of these bones were stolen or sold on the black market. And what typically happens in these situations is that the items are hidden from public view, usually becoming part of private collections. The illegality and macabre nature of having these bones makes it unlikely or extremely rare they would resurface in the public view. There are several popular theories as to where these bones ended up, and why we don't see them in museums today. And I have provided links to some of those sources in the description below, including those that implicate the Smithsonian Museum and the Vatican. Please keep in mind these are theories, not proven facts, so take them as you will. Either way, the numerous accounts from various people in various countries around the world and a wide time range suggests that people were seeing and describing something in a similar and consistent way. Modern-day humans marvel at how ancient civilizations were able to build megalithic structures like Baalbek and the Great Pyramids, and move and set the building materials such as stones to build these structures. One theory, which is corroborated in ancient stories passed down through the millennia by a broad range of cultures, is that giants helped normal-sized humans move the materials to build these structures, which were usually made of stone. This theory actually has some validity if we look at modern references. For example, in one of my prior videos about the Nephilim, I talked about the strongest man in modern history, who was Angus MacAskill, a 7-foot 9-inch tall proportionate human. Angus was at least a foot taller than the current strongmen we see today. And given his proportional size at that height, he was able to lift enormous weights, much heavier than strongmen we see today. Angus lived in Canada in the mid-1800s and performed many feats of strength, including lifting and carrying a ship anchor that weighed more than a ton across a dock. If Angus could carry an anchor that weighed more than a ton, how much more could a giant from ancient times that ranged in height between 9 and 22 feet carry? Logic needs to be applied here. They would have been able to move and carry multi-ton stones, especially when working together. There are several places in the world where large populations of giants were said to have lived, some of which are Sardinia, Malta, Patagonia, Israel, and in parts of North America, as stated previously. Each of these giant hotspots tend to have giant tombs or other giant structures, like doorways and ceilings, that are much larger and higher than normal-sized equivalents from the ancient world. There is literally well over 1,000 of these tombs and related monuments of giants scattered across these hotspot countries, and other places as well, that have been discovered. I find the tombs the most interesting because there are many of them, and the chambers where the bodies would have been laid are much larger than comparable chambers for normal-sized humans, suggesting much larger bodies were placed in those areas. Again, many will say, if there are so many of these so-called giant tombs, where are all the bones? Again, I come back to some of the reasons provided before that could explain the absence of the bones in the present day. Also, given the ease of getting into most of these tombs, it is reasonable to assume that grave robbers or other interested parties removed or destroyed the bones from these tombs over the centuries. Cave drawings, hieroglyphs, petroglyphs, and other ancient drawings and writings speak about or depict giants, many times in the context of historical events that occurred in those times. The frequency and consistency of these images across various cultures from around the world suggests something must have been real. It's too coincidental that consistent depictions of giants by people groups from all around the world, spanning the ancient, medieval, and early modern periods, would occur when the spread of ideas was extremely slow, or non-existent, and oceans separated entire populations of people. Giants are also spoken about across a broad range of historical cultures from around the world. In fact, there are well over 200 known stories that have been passed down through the generations, or that have been preserved in ancient writings that speak to the existence of giants. So the topic of giants is clearly not just a Bible thing. In fact, some of the most famous stories from antiquity have giants in the stories, such as in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where King Gilgamesh of Uruk was a giant himself, and was, according to the story, approximately 17 feet tall. The commonalities across these stories is striking, and implies there must be some truth embedded in them. It is just too much of a coincidence for various cultures from around the world to be making up stories that share so many similarities, without them being at least partly true. So by now you're probably thinking either, wow, there is some significant evidence that these giants actually existed, or you're thinking, wow, this guy's just telling fairy tales. Sure, I fully understand, acknowledge, and concede that some of these types of evidence may be exaggerations, or faked, and may not be actual evidence of giants. But all 7 types of evidence being fabrications? I don't think that's logical. Clearly something's up here that bears further exploration. To me, given the broad scope and frequency of these types of evidence from all around the world, I find it harder to believe these giants from the ancient world didn't exist. But still, I'm curious what you think. Please leave your comments below. Also, if I accidentally missed a legitimate type of evidence for the existence of giants, please let me know in the comments section below. I am merely a messenger, someone pointing the way to these sources and encouraging the audience to look and consider the evidence for themselves. There are people that have far more expertise in these subjects than I do. So instead of me trying to deep dive on each of these points of evidence as to the existence of giants in antiquity, I have aggregated some of the best legitimate sources I have come across on this subject, and have compiled them for you in the notes section below. If the notion of giants are mere fairy tales, why then do the stories about them take place in real, archaeologically verified places? The Valley of Elah, Gath, Bashan, and other places have all been found. All of the stories I've read that are actual fairy tales or fiction take place in fantasy lands. Examples of this is Middle-earth in the Lord of the Rings saga, and Narnia in the Chronicles of Narnia novels. Yet the Bible is different. The places talked about in the books of the Bible are historically accurate, real places that can be visited, and many of these places that have been discovered have been verified by archaeologists. So why does this matter? Evidence suggesting the Nephilim giants were real is just another of numerous examples proving the Bible is a true and historically accurate story. Though I find the topic of the Nephilim giants interesting, at the end of the day, there is only one thing that really matters, and that is that Jesus is who he says he is. I encourage you to take a look at the links in the description box below. Each of these resources have been carefully vetted and are meant to go deeper on the 7 types of evidence for the existence of giants, with sources, context, and logical, rational thought. I also encourage you to check out the other videos I've made about the Nephilim and about the book of Genesis. Thank you for watching. Why God Ministries was established with the intention of applying science-based, rational, and logical thought, and the sharing of real-world examples that provide compelling evidence proving that the Bible is true and that the God of the Bible is real. God bless you, and I hope you have a great day.